Hey guys, tonight we drift back, way, way back, into a world where the sun barely bothers to rise, where your fingers forget what warmth feels like, and where the cold isn't just outside. It lives with you, sleeps beside you, breathes down your collar when you're not looking. You're in medieval Europe now, but not the candlelit hall with roaring fires and drunken songs. You're in a dirt floor cottage, walls packed with straw and prayers, a leaking roof that groans louder than the pigs, and a kitchen that thinks mold is a spice. It's late autumn, that dangerous middle ground where nothing grows but everything starts dying. The leaves are already long gone, swept off by winds that sting like wasps. The trees are bare, the air is thin, and you swear the clouds are lower than usual, like they're pressing down on the whole village. Your tunic is coarse, your boots are cracked. You dream of wool the way nobles dream of gold. And the worst part? Winter hasn't even started. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from. Is it cold where you are? Is your nose frozen like ours? Drop your location and local time below. I want to hear about your version of winter. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's still dark when you step outside, because that's the only time chores can happen before the baby wakes. The sky is more charcoal than black, and every breath you take puffs out like a tiny ghost. You carry a dented iron pail down the slope to the stream, praying it hasn't frozen solid. It has. You crouch, chip at the ice with a flat rock, and finally crack through, slush splashing up into your sleeves. It's barely water, more like crunchy mud, but it's all you've got. You fill the bucket halfway. The rest is too solid to bother. Back in the cottage, someone's already swearing. Your cousin, probably, trying to get the fire to restart with damp wood and blind optimism. The baby is squalling. Your spouse is coaxing a handful of embers with kindling that smells like mildew and last month's disappointment. You're 18, responsible for a house, 2 goats, a runaway pig, 3 children, and 1 unhelpful cousin. And all you can think is, do we have enough dried turnip to last until the equinox? Mainstream historical fact. The medieval peasants' winter diet was about 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day, almost entirely from barley, oats, dried legumes, and sometimes weak ale. Fruits were gone, vegetables rotted quickly, and unless you butchered your own animal, meat was as rare as silence in a tavern. You slam the bucket down beside the hearth, water sloshes. Your spouse throws you a look that says thanks, but also, this isn't enough. You nod. Of course it isn't, but it's all you've got. You wish, not for money, not even for sunshine, just for dry socks, or a second blanket, or a single morning where the pig doesn't escape. Your cousin bursts through the door at that exact moment, red-faced, arms full of twigs and muttering, "We got a situation with the pig." You don't ask. You don't have the emotional capacity to care. The baby coughs. Someone knocks over the oat barrel. A chicken walks through the kitchen like it owns the place. You consider, for one surreal moment, just walking into the woods and letting the wolves adopt you. Historians still argue whether peasants in the Middle Ages were constantly miserable or just extremely good at pretending everything was fine. Either way, you've got things to do. You pull your cloak tighter, step back outside. The sky is turning a soft pewter gray now, just light enough to show you what you already feared. The frost didn't just visit, it conquered. The fields are white, hard, silent. The goat lets out a sound like it's trying to lodge a formal complaint. The pig, you soon discover, is in the neighbor's onion patch. Again, you breathe in, count to 5, and remind yourself, this is only the beginning. Winter hasn't even started. You wake to stillness, but not the peaceful kind. It's the heavy silence of a world wrapped too tightly in frost. Your breath fogs the air, like smoke from a dying candle. The fire has burned down to a stubborn orange glow, barely clinging to life beneath last night's ash. You poke it with a stick, hopeful, and it sighs in return. Disappointed maybe, but willing to cooperate. Your joints complain before your feet even hit the floor. The cold lives in your bones now, squatting there like a tenant with no intention of moving out. Every motion is slower. You're not just tired, you're winter tired. It's a kind of fatigue that settles deep, somewhere between your spine and your will to continue. Your boots, if you have them, are stiff with yesterday's frost. You shove your feet in anyway. There's no other choice. The walk outside to relieve yourself is brief, humiliating, and perilous. The snow crunches. Something shifts in the trees. You don't look too hard. It might be a branch, or it might be something watching you. You've learned not to check. Inside again, you press your hands to the stone around the hearth. Still cold. Of course. You whisper something, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, and begin the daily revival of the fire. Flint, steel, frozen fingers. The kindling is damp, the logs are reluctant, and your breath fogs like a ghost supervising the process. Eventually, it catches. You win, for now. Breakfast, such as it is, comes next. Yesterday's pottage reheated, possibly with more water and fewer ingredients. It's not food, it's sustenance. You chew slowly, not for flavor, but to make the moment last. No one speaks much. Words take energy, and you're all budgeting that like firewood. The cold outside isn't just cold anymore. It's the cold, capital C. The kind of cold that doesn't just freeze, it judges. You feel it push through the walls. It prowls your home like a curious cat, testing for weaknesses. It finds them all. You stuff more straw into the cracks. You layer every cloth you own over the door. You shift the bed again, just a few inches closer to the hearth. You don't have a floor plan. You have a fire proximity strategy. Even Uncle Gain has moved, his usual protests lost in the chill that makes vocal cords stiff. And it's not just you. The animals know too. The chickens have gone silent, huddled into a tight, feathered mass that breathes in unison. The pigs no longer grunt. They just watch, wide-eyed and wary. The cow has become crankier than usual, which is impressive. Even the dog, normally enthusiastic to a fault, sits by the fire like a pensioner, sighing now and then at the state of things. Historians still argue whether the peasant homes of medieval Europe were designed with intentional airflow, or if they just leaked that badly. Either way, the draft is relentless. It sneaks up your sleeves, slides down your back, finds your ankles like it has a grudge. You learn to walk faster, not because you're in a hurry, but because standing still has become an act of self-harm. Outside, the world looks quiet, deceptively so. The snow blankets everything, muting the sounds of suffering. But under that white sheet lies a trap. Ice-covered paths, frozen wells, and ruts so deep you could lose a small sibling in them. You walk with care, eyes down, hoping your boot doesn't betray you with a sudden slip. Water in the bucket freezes over again. You break it with a ladle, watching the surface fracture like glass. Your hand goes in. You regret everything. You pull it out, shaking and blue, then press it against the dog because the dog is somehow warmer than your own fire. Back inside, the silence continues. You try not to notice how everyone watches the fire too closely. It's not just warmth, it's morale. If it goes out, so might your resolve. You add another log, too soon, and feel the weight of everyone's eyes silently judging you for wasting fuel. There's a rhythm to winter now. Wake, fire, water, food, patch, endure, sleep, repeat. The sameness is numbing. It's comforting in a twisted way until something breaks. Today, it's the roof. You hear it first, a soft crack, then a distant crumple. You freeze, unsure which corner of the house just failed. A quick inspection reveals the far end where the thatch had started sagging last week. Snow's pushed it too far. Water is seeping in now, slow but persistent, like doubt. You stuff more straw up there. You tie cloth. You whisper to the wall as if begging it to hold. It doesn't answer. But for now, the drip slows. Another tiny victory in a season that rarely offers any. By midday, the sun, if it even counts as one, crests low and weak across the sky. You squint at it, almost resentful. It gives just enough light to show how filthy everything is, how frayed your cloak has become, how red and cracked your hands are. It taunts you. There's no break. You keep moving, not out of energy, but because stillness hurts. You tend the animals, check the grain, stomp snow from the firewood pile, and curse the fact that you never cut enough. You never do. The pile is already lower than it should be, and winter has barely started. Tonight, you know the cold will come harder. You feel it pressing closer, more confident now. It knows you're tired. It knows your roof is weak. It knows there's mold in the straw, and you're down to your last needle for mending. But you also know its pattern. You've survived before. You remember the year the snow crushed the barn, the year the stew froze in the bowl, the year your sister got frostbite and still made it through. You're not strong, not really. You're just here. And sometimes, in the Middle Ages, that's all survival means. Outside, the stars begin to prick the sky. You brace for another night. More wood, more soup, more snoring from Uncle Gain. You don't light a second candle. Too expensive, too unnecessary. Instead, you sit by the fire and listen to the wind, to the wood creaking, to the silence of a world trying to outlast itself. The fire pops. You smile. One more day, done. You start the morning the same way every other morning begins, in winter. With cold fingers fumbling toward the fire, praying yesterday's embers didn't give up before you did. They didn't. Barely. A faint glow huddles in the ash like a secret that doesn't want to be kept. The real concern isn't the stew, or even your aching joints. It's firewood. That dwindling, irreplaceable, increasingly emotional pile stacked by the wall. You glance at it every few hours now, counting it like someone might count coins during a famine. And, in a way, you are. Because firewood is currency. Warmth is survival, and the only way to buy it is by chopping until your arms feel like boiled turnips. It starts in autumn, of course, ideally. Everyone says to start early, but no one does. There's always something else to finish. A roof to mend, a goat to chase, a cousin's wedding that requires 3 days of feasting and regrettable dancing. By the time you're swinging an axe, the wind already bites, and the ground is hardening like stale bread. Your axe, naturally, is a family heirloom. If by heirloom you mean a barely held-together relic with more personality than function. The handle creaks, the blade is blunt, and the last time it got sharpened was probably the same year someone last used soap. You don't just need wood. You need lots of it. Not ambiance logs. Not a couple of sticks to warm your toes. Logs. You need enough to cook, to heat the room, to boil water, to dry clothes, to keep rats nervous, and to chase away the kind of cold that slips under your fingernails and starts unpacking a suitcase. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had official communal woodcutting systems or simply relied on whichever family member was most disposable to the forest. Either way, you're elected today. You trudge out in the early gray, dragging a sled made from parts of another broken sled. Snow crunches beneath you. The air has teeth. The trees wait, tall and unimpressed. The forest doesn't feel magical. It feels predatory. The first swing of the axe is satisfying. The second is less so. By the 10th, you're rethinking every life choice that led to this moment. Wood doesn't care how tired you are. It doesn't want to fall. It leans, it sways, it splits wrong. It laughs and barks. Eventually, you win. Sort of. A tree falls. Half the battle. Now comes the other half. Chopping, dragging, stacking, cursing. Repeat. You stack the pieces beside the cottage as neatly as you can. Too tight and the wood won't dry. Too loose and it'll fall over and break your toe. Which already happened last year. You still remember the scream. Not yours, your brother's, who was standing nearby and thought he was next. Once you've chopped enough to pretend you're winning, you face the next problem: drying. It takes months. You don't have months. So, you burn it wet, which means your fire hisses, smokes, and spits resentment into the room. The house fills with a fine layer of disappointment. Breathing becomes optional. You try not to cough too loud. Makes the priest suspicious. If you're lucky, your wood burns. If not, you've just created an indoor fog bank and added smoke blindness to your list of winter hobbies. Legally, you can't even gather from most forests. They belong to the local lord, who loves his trees more than his peasants. If you're caught foraging, the punishment ranges from a stern talking to and a fine to being made an example of, which in medieval terms usually involves public humiliation and a surprising number of sticks. So instead, you get creative. Peat moss, dried dung, brush bundles, all technically burnable. Peat smells like damp betrayal. Dung works shockingly well, but turns your home into a sensory experience no one asked for, and brush burns faster than you can say, "Was that all of it?" There's no shame anymore. If it burns, it's useful. A broken stool, fuel, old fence post, fuel. That decorative crossbeam you've never liked? Fuel. Sentimentality is something rich people can afford. You're burning furniture and pretending it never matched anyway. Quirky fact. In some villages, peasants would dream about firewood. Not abstract dreams. Literal, full-color firewood dreams. Logs stacked high. Dry sticks glowing in firelight. People waking up with a smile, only to find the same 3 damp logs they had yesterday. It wasn't just heat, It was hope. You even develop arguments about it. Who burned the good stick? Why did you use 2 logs for the soup? That one was for Christmas. Fire management becomes a family sport. Embers are hoarded like treasure. You learn how to stir the ash just right, how to blow gently into coals, how to wrap glowing bits in cloth and store them overnight like you're tucking in a pet dragon. You become fire's humble servant. Every day you feed it, you beg it, you curse it. And if it dies, you pretend you didn't just watch your soul flicker with it. The richest people, they don't chop their own wood. They don't even see wood. They sit in rooms warmed by entire trees while servants return from the woods, frostbitten and half limping. You are the servant. Your fireplace is a damp hole that smokes more than it heats. There's a moment, maybe around mid-January, where you realize you've burned through the entire left side of the pile. The right side is moldy. You stare at it like a man counting coins at a market stall, knowing there's no way it'll last the month. And then, the dreams start again. Not about sunshine or spring, about dry wood, about the perfect log, about a crackling hearth that doesn't choke you when you lean in. Because in this world, heat isn't a luxury, it's a religion. And you're still waiting for your miracle. The fire crackles, but not with confidence. It's that soft, damp kind of crackle, more complaint than comfort. The wet wood hisses as if offended that it's being burned at all. Smoke curls upward in fat, gray spirals, slowly filling the room like a misplaced weather system. You wave at it with one hand, trying to create a draft. The other hand is clutching a pot that's never fully clean, no matter how many times you scrape it. Everything smokes. Nothing warms. That's your motto this week. The fire pit is at the center of the room, more ceremonial than efficient. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that may or may not be clogged with a bird's nest. The smoke should rise. It does, eventually, but not before it circles the room, kisses your eyes, and reminds your lungs who's boss. You cough. Everyone coughs. Uncle Gain has a cough that sounds like a dying accordion, and somehow, it's still going strong. You shift closer to the hearth, careful not to get too near. Sparks are unpredictable, and your only other tunic already has 2 holes and a scorch mark from last month's accidental rewarming. You start to wonder what it would be like to breathe clean air. A silly thought, really. You haven't experienced that since the first frost. Medieval indoor living is just a long, slow negotiation between your lungs and the smog. Even the dog wheezes occasionally. The walls are coated in soot now. You used to think they were brown. Turns out, they were beige all along. Who knew? You tell yourself the black layer provides insulation. It doesn't. But pretending keeps your spirits warmer than the fire does. Here's a fun tidbit. In some areas of Europe, houses were intentionally built without chimneys for centuries. Scholars still debate whether it was because chimneys were seen as luxury items, or because the lingering smoke helped fumigate lice and fleas. Either way, no one seems to miss the irony that you're being slowly fumigated right along with the bugs. The smell is a cocktail of tallow, scorched wool, and wood that really, really didn't want to burn. It sticks to your clothes, your blankets, your thoughts. You'll carry it into spring like a souvenir. One time, you saw someone sniff their own sleeve and sigh. Not in disgust, just acceptance. Your cooking pot is suspended above the fire. It's blackened with use and has lost its original shape sometime in the previous decade. But it still works. Kind of. You scrape a layer of soot from the bottom before adding water. That soot is now flavor. You start boiling dinner. It's soup in the most generous sense. A few sad vegetables, maybe a bone if you're lucky. It smokes too, though not from heat, more from existential despair. And then, the worst happens. The fire sputters. You poke it, you add a stick. Nothing, you add another. The smoke thickens, your eyes sting. Still no real flame. You lean in, whispering promises and threats, like it's a reluctant toddler. Finally, it catches. You sit back, like you've just negotiated peace. Because you have. With the fire, with the cold, with winter itself. But there's no celebration. You can't afford to waste the energy. Now, the air in the room is more soup than oxygen. The smoke doesn't even move anymore. It just lingers, like a judgmental ghost. You open the door for a second to let it out. That's all it takes. The cold rushes in like a jealous lover. It touches everything. Your legs, your spine, your soup. You slam the door shut, but it's too late. The fire flickers nervously. You apologize to it with another stick. The ceiling drips in one corner. Not fast, just enough to let you know you failed to fix that leak last autumn. A steady plink into a bowl. You time your breathing to it. It becomes a rhythm. Smoke above, ice below. And yet, it's kind of comforting? Not in the traditional sense, but in that still alive, still trying kind of way. The fire, such as it is a small, flickering symbol of your defiance. You haven't given up. Not yet. You stare at it for a long time. The flames lick the wood. The coals shift. There's a moment, just one, where you feel something like peace, not comfort, just the absence of immediate suffering. That's the closest you'll get. The fire becomes a character in your life. You talk to it, coax it, blame it when things go wrong. Sometimes you imagine it answering back. You're not alone in this. Everyone does it. You've overheard your neighbor whispering apologies to her hearth. One man even named his fire. It died 2 weeks later. He mourned. Mainstream fact, fire was central to medieval life not just for warmth, but for spiritual reasons too. Many cultures viewed it as sacred, cleansing. In some villages, hearth fires were never allowed to go out completely. It was considered bad luck, or even an invitation for illness. You wonder about that. Maybe it's superstition, or maybe it's just that you've started associating warmth with hope. The smoke shifts. You cough again, but the fire stays. You settle in for the night. Everyone clusters close, goats included. Uncle Gain is already snoring again. You press your feet closer to the edge of the hearth, careful not to set your socks on fire. That happened once. It was not ideal. The room dims, shadows flicker, the smoke thickens. You close your eyes. The fire crackles. You're still here. Dinner isn't a feast. It's an event built more on ritual than reward. A pot of pottage that's older than some of the children in the house. You sit around it like worshipers at a particularly humble shrine, stirring slowly, cautiously, like whatever's at the bottom might either nourish or curse you. Tonight's menu? Turnip soup with a generous garnish of despair. The stew simmers low on the smoky hearth, never quite boiling, never quite cold, just lukewarm and vaguely suspicious. You peer into the pot. Some grayish roots, a few beans that split open 3 days ago, and half a carrot. someone swears is still good if you cut around the soft bits. You believe them because the alternative is believing it's not. Dinner smells like boiled regret and leftover smoke. Bread, if you have any, is less food and more weapon. Hard, flat, dense, more bludgeon than bun. You break it against the edge of the pot and pretend that's what you meant to do. The crust is a little moldy. You scrape. Mold is flavor, you tell yourself. Flavor and resilience. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval bread often included ground-up grains of barley or rye, but also bark, acorns, and sometimes, when desperation really set in, ground straw or sawdust. It filled your belly. It didn't care what you thought of the taste. As you chew your soup, yes, chew, you listen to the sounds of a medieval mealtime. The slurp of broth, the dull crunch of boiled turnip, the occasional cough, the crackling fire. It's a symphony of survival. No one talks. It takes energy to complain, and the food is too scarce to risk spitting any out mid-sentence. You glance at your cousin, who's staring into the pot like he's hoping to see a chicken. He won't. You haven't seen poultry in weeks, not unless you count the feathers the cat coughed up last Thursday. Speaking of poultry, the hens have stopped laying again. They're on strike. Too cold. Too dark. They huddle in a silent, feathered mob near the hearth, their judgmental eyes reminding you that even they are unhappy with the state of things. The rooster, however, is thriving. Loud, unhelpful, and full of opinions. You consider making him into soup, but he's stringy and, unfortunately, the only reason the hens haven't mutinied completely. Tonight, you've added a single egg to the pot. It's the only one this week, and you crack it with reverence. The yolk breaks. Everyone sighs. Even the fire dims a little, as if disappointed. And yet, this is what passes for a decent night. You stretch the stew, add more water, fewer complaints. You ladle out a portion for each person, a scoop of history, a spoonful of sadness, a swirl of hope. You pretend not to notice how thin it is. You all pretend, quirky detail. Some families would keep a pot simmering for weeks at a time, constantly adding new ingredients as old ones disappeared. It wasn't cooking. It was stew in permanent evolution, like sourdough, but sadder. You chew on a piece of bread that may or may not contain wood fiber. It sticks to your teeth, your soul. Still, it's warm. That counts. The rats, of course, are having a better night. You hear them in the rafters, scuttling like tiny burglars. They've gnawed through the grain sack again. This time, they left droppings in your flour. You'll sift them out later. Or not. At some point, you just decide to stop looking. You hang what's left of the food from the rafters in a battered canvas bag. High up, away from the dog, the rats, the toddler who once bit into a raw onion like it was an apple. You don't blame him. It was round. It was food adjacent. It was something. You wash the bowls, one bucket of water between everyone, reused until it's more broth than rinse. Clean is aspirational. As night deepens, you stretch out by the hearth again. Your stomach growls. Not loudly, not anymore. Just a low, familiar ache, like a second heartbeat. You ignore it. You've trained yourself to. Because hunger in winter isn't a signal. It's a constant. A quiet pressure behind your ribs. Not panic-inducing, not yet, but always there. You've grown used to measuring satisfaction by how long it takes your stomach to protest after eating. If it waits more than 20 minutes, you consider it a win. Historians still debate how accurate the medieval diet really was, given how much of it went unrecorded. Most agree it was monotonous, low in protein, and almost entirely seasonal. But there's no argument about this. It didn't fill you. It just delayed the next wave of need. Your youngest sibling licks the spoon, then the bowl, then tries to lick the pot. You let him. You'd do it too if you weren't pretending to be a dignified adult. Uncle Gain starts talking about the stew his grandmother used to make, full of meat and herbs. No one believes him, but you let him talk. Stories are calorie-free comfort. Plus, it distracts from the fact that you're all wondering if anyone will trade a pair of mittens for a turnip. You glance at the woodpile. 2 logs left for the evening. The fire will need to be coaxed through the night. You tuck your feet under a fur that smells like goat and last summer's hay. It's not soft, it's not warm, but it's something. And that's what dinner is too. Not nourishment, not celebration, just something. The smoke thickens again. Your eyes sting. The fire pops. Someone coughs. And outside, the snow continues to fall without caring whether you ate enough. You pull the blanket tighter. And you promise yourself, tomorrow's stew will be better. It won't. But the thought is warm. Hunger, in winter, becomes your most faithful companion. It's not a visitor anymore. It's a resident. A quiet, persistent whisper that never leaves your side. You stop thinking of it as a signal and more like background noise, the kind of low hum you forget to notice until it spikes. Tonight, it spikes. You lie awake, the last log long gone from the fire, and the cold wrapping around you like a damp shroud. Your stomach grumbles, not politely, but with the bitterness of someone who's been ignored too long. You try to sleep. You think about soup. You think about bread. Then you think about bark. Not figuratively, literally, because eventually you do start to consider the inedible. Tree bark, moss, anything vaguely plant-like. You've heard stories of people boiling leather. You laugh at the idea until you realize your belt might be missing in the morning. You're not proud of this. But pride, like butter, is in short supply. Come morning, your stew pot is empty. Not just scraped clean, licked clean. You swear someone tried to eat the last flakes of soot. You glance at the toddler. He's chewing a button. You let him. It's fiber. You go outside to check the root cellar. A generous term, since it's really just a damp hole with a wooden cover and a generous population of mushrooms you're too scared to name. Inside, 3 shriveled turnips, a jar of fermented cabbage, and a sack of onions so soft they're practically a liquid. Still, it's something. You take the turnips back inside. Slice them thin, thinner, whisper thin. You throw them into a pot with water and a little salt, if you're lucky. If not, you just whisper encouragement into the steam and hope that works. The result is barely edible. But edible is a high bar these days. Mainstream fact, during the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, entire regions of Europe suffered such intense food shortages that people turned to bark flour, moss, and in some places, allegedly even clay. There were whispers, unconfirmed and chilling, of even darker choices. Historians still argue whether these stories of cannibalism were rumors used to scare children or tragic truths buried in shame. Either way, you don't talk about it. You just chew your stew a little slower. The hunger does strange things to people. You catch yourself looking at a sack of dried beans and wondering if anyone would notice if you kept a few for yourself. Just a handful. Just enough. You don't take them. Yet. But the thought plants itself. And now, the children have started asking questions. Will there be meat soon? You tell them stories about spring, about lambs and eggs and green leaves. It's easier than explaining that the only thing you'll hunt this week is another sack of potatoes from under the straw. You do still have some dried herbs. They add flavor, slightly, and help keep morale above sea level. You sprinkle a few into the stew, stir slowly, and convince everyone the soup tastes different today. They nod. It doesn't, but pretending tastes better than honesty. Quirky detail. Some medieval folks used to keep pebbles in their mouths to help suppress hunger and produce saliva. You tried that once. You chipped a tooth and decided it wasn't worth the added dental trauma. Then there's the barter system. You consider trading your old wool cloak for a dried fish from the neighbor. But the cloak has holes. The fish is suspect. And the neighbor once stole your fence post. You nod politely and walk away, stomach growling in Morse code. And there are leaner families than yours. The widow 2 huts down hasn't come to church in 3 Sundays. Her son is coughing. Her fire hasn't been lit in days. You send her a crust of bread. She cries. You tell her not to, because if you do too, it'll mean you finally feel it. Not the hunger in your gut, but the one in your heart. The cold sharpens everything. Hunger becomes a lens, and you start to see things differently. A dog's rib cage becomes an anatomy lesson. A cat becomes a resource with paws. You haven't done anything yet, but you understand now why people stop naming their animals in winter. Even the rats are looking thin. You catch one in the pantry. It looks at you. You look at it. There's a moment, an understanding. You let it go. It's too small to eat and too desperate to kill. You're not there. Not yet. Still, you dream. Not of feasts. Not anymore. You dream of bread that doesn't crumble, of soup with things floating in it, of cheese, of apples, of butter, real butter. Spread thick across warm bread, oozing into every bite. You wake up licking your lips and find your pillow damp with drool. The hunger doesn't scream. It lingers. It paces your thoughts. It makes you irrational. You snap at your brother for using an extra spoonful of oats. You snap at the dog for begging. You snap at the fire for dying too fast. Then you sit quietly and feel ashamed. Not because you were mean, but because you've finally admitted how close you are to losing that last piece of control. And yet, you get up. You boil the stew again. You add more water. You cut the last onion and try to make it last across 3 meals. Because in winter, hunger isn't just a feeling, it's a schedule. It tells you when to work, when to stop, when to go to bed. You obey it because you have no choice. And when someone knocks at the door, an uncle, a neighbor, a beggar, you ladle them a bowl. Thin, small, barely warm, but still something. Because the only thing worse than being hungry is knowing someone else is hungrier. And that, for now, might be the only warmth you have left. You don't notice the house falling apart all at once. It fails in increments. A draft here, a droplet there. The slow creep of mildew where the wall met optimism in early autumn. Now, in deep winter, your home feels less like a building and more like a suggestion someone once whispered into the cold. The floor is dirt. On good days, it's frozen. On bad days, it turns to mud, and you track it through everything. Your blanket, your stew, your soul. You scatter straw to soften it, but straw only lasts so long before it surrenders and becomes a soggy, moldy quilt of failure. It smells like regret and old milk. The walls are wattle and daub, sticks and mud, basically. Not bad in theory. In practice, a festival of cracks, leaks, and drafts that travel like they paid rent. You stuff cloth and moss into every gap, whispering prayers that this patchwork will hold through the next windstorm. Above you, the thatched roof tries its best, which isn't much. It sags, it leaks, birds nest in it, mice tunnel through it. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, you hear the pitter-patter of feet above you, and then the foot lands inside. You scream. It screams, and then everyone pretends it didn't happen. Mainstream historical fact: most medieval homes had no glass windows, just holes, sometimes covered with oiled cloth or parchment if you were lucky, otherwise, just empty. Wind? Invited. Rain? Encouraged. Your privacy? A fantasy. You've hung an old tunic over the opening that passes for a window. It does nothing. You watch the fabric flap like a surrender flag every time the wind stirs. One day, you're sure it'll just fly away. There's a door, technically, made of rough planks that warp and groan, and sometimes refuse to close without a kick and a curse. It's not secure. When the wind blows hard, it howls like it's trying to enter, and some nights you swear it does. The hinges are wood, the latch is twine. Security is a log you wedge against it at night. Unless, of course, you burned the log 2 days ago. In that case, you just hope. The hearth, your proud centerpiece, is basically a pit with ambition. No chimney, just a hole in the roof that invites more birds than it vents smoke. When the fire is strong, smoke fills the air like a cloud of penance. You cough, you wheeze, you adapt. Quirky detail: some peasants believed smoke helped ward off spirits and pests. The more smoke, the better. So, if you're choking in your sleep, you might comfort yourself, knowing the ghost of your grandfather is probably annoyed enough to leave. Lighting is another marvel. Tallow candles if you're wealthy enough. You aren't. Instead, you've dipped reeds in animal fat and pretend they're torches. They burn low, sputter often, and smell like despair. You light one. It immediately goes out. You pretend that's normal. Furniture is minimal. A table, a bench, a stool you fight over. The bed is straw in a sack. It crackles when you shift, pokes you in places you can't reach, and grows things you try not to name. You sleep in your clothes under layers of blankets, furs, and whatever warmth your relatives generate. Uncle Gain snores loud enough to scare off wolves, but at least his body heat makes up for the auditory trauma. The goat has moved in again, not because it wants to, but because the lean-to collapsed last week and no one had the strength to rebuild it. It sleeps under the bench now, occasionally nibbling your blanket in its sleep. And the smell? It's indescribable. Smoke, dung, old stew, feet, mold, and something distinctly feral. You try burning herbs to cover it. They fall into the fire and make it worse. You tell yourself it smells like survival. It doesn't. Still, you sweep. With a bundle of twigs tied together. You sweep because it gives you something to do. Something to pretend you can control. The dirt rearranges itself. The mice don't even move anymore. They just watch, judging silently from the corners. You whisper to the house sometimes. Hold on. Don't leak today. Let the roof stay. You patch the daub with new mud. You tie cloth over the rafters. You wedge a rock where the floor meets the wind. It's maintenance born of desperation, not planning. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants saw their homes as temporary shelters or sacred spaces. Likely, it was both. They were built to fail, but you lived in them like they mattered, because they did, because they were all you had. Some wealthier families would whitewash their walls with lime, not for aesthetics, for lice. You consider it. But the last time you had lime, someone used it to try to clean their teeth and ended up with bleeding gums and a haunted expression. You patch, you mend, you sigh. And yet, somehow, the cottage holds. You listen to the wind whistle through the cracks. You dodge the drip from the roof. You hang herbs again, not because they work, but because they make the air feel less angry. You don't expect comfort. You don't ask for peace. You just ask the walls to hold until spring. And for tonight, at least, they agree. You're halfway through the winter now, or so you hope. Not because the days feel warmer. They don't. Not because the sun stays longer. It doesn't. But because your body has begun to adapt to the rhythm of enduring. And that rhythm now includes the sounds, smells, and involuntary cuddling of livestock. The goats are back inside, not just passing through, moved in, permanent residents. They bleat, they stomp, they fart in their sleep. They chew on the ends of your tunic and treat the bench as a personal throne. But they're warm, and warmth is rent enough. The pigs, once banished to the pen, have been reassigned to the corner near the fire. It's not cozy, it's strategic. They generate heat like small grunting radiators. You stop noticing the smell after day 2, mostly, until someone nudges the chamber pot and you remember everything again. The chickens roost where they please. You gave up assigning them a place. One has taken to laying eggs near your bedding. You call her Hope. She's laid exactly 3 eggs all season. Each one is treated like gold. You once watched your brother cry while boiling one. You're not alone in this medieval winter, but the company isn't always reassuring. Uncle Gain continues his nightly monologues, delivered in broken Latin and half-finished threats about debts he insists someone owes him. You've stopped asking. Everyone has. He smells like wool and cabbage and something faintly tragic, but he's warm, and you've learned to sleep with your back turned and your nose buried under the goat blanket. Mainstream historical fact. In many peasant homes, animals were not just tools, they were thermal partners. Bringing livestock inside wasn't laziness, it was insulation. You didn't just raise animals, you shared winter with them. The toddler has become best friends with the piglets. He feeds them from his bowl, shares his blanket, and once tried to ride one like a pony. It went badly, but he's happy, and that's more than most can say. The dog is insulted. He was once king of the hearth. Now he's just another heat source, squeezed between a goat and a child who snores louder than Uncle Gain. He's taken to growling at the chickens and pretending it's about dominance. Everyone knows it's jealousy. At night, the room is a tangle of limbs, fur, snoring, and flickering shadows. You don't sleep so much as pause between fire checks. Every few hours, someone, usually you, must crawl from the warmth to prod the coals, add a log, curse, and return. The cold bites hard during those moments. You learn to do it fast. Sometimes the fire flares, casting everyone's shapes in ghostlight on the walls. You stare at them, goat, pig, child, elder, and wonder when exactly your life became a barn with tax obligations. You don't complain out loud. Complaining stirs the air and lets in more cold. Besides, no one listens anymore. Everyone's too busy pretending the floor isn't frozen and the roof isn't dripping on the stew. The stew, by the way, has acquired a new flavor. Hey, thanks to the goat's latest exploration of your cookware. You call it rustic. Your spouse calls it inedible. You eat it anyway. Quirky detail. In some regions, it was common to hang meat or fish from rafters, not just to preserve it, but to keep it out of reach of opportunistic pigs. You've seen your pig eyeing the pantry. He knows things. You're watching him. Outside, the snow piles high. You don't go out unless you must. Every trip risks slipping, frostbite, or a run-in with the neighbor's angry geese. The last time you fell, you landed face first in the pig pen. The pig was not surprised. You were. Inside, everything creaks. The walls, the beams, your joints. Every sound has meaning. A new creak is a cause for concern. A quiet night is more alarming than a loud one. Quiet means the goats are planning something. You still clean. Sort of. You sweep, or at least push the straw around. You change out the hay where the pigs sleep, mostly because the toddler tried to eat it. The chickens are self-cleaning, you've decided. Or maybe just beyond help. The baby cried last night, loud, long, echoing off the rafters. The goat joined in. Then the toddler. Then Uncle Gain muttered a prayer so intense it might have summoned something. You rocked the child until the fire died, then relit the fire with curses and a whisper, then rocked again. This is routine now. Noise, chaos, smoke, stew. Repeat. And somehow, it works. You don't remember what privacy feels like. Modesty vanished when the goat walked in during bath day and stared like it owned the place. You've stopped reacting when a pig sits on your foot. You've stopped reacting to most things, really. Survival takes precedence over decorum. Historians still argue whether these close quarters fostered stronger family bonds or just higher rates of passive-aggressive silence. You'd argue both, but not too loudly. Uncle Gain is napping. At night, as you lie beneath a fur that smells like 4 seasons ago, you listen. Not for danger, not for wolves, but for signs of life. The pig snuffling, the chicken settling, the child breathing, the fire whispering as it clings to the last dry twig. It's not peace, it's not comfort, but it's company. And in the depth of a medieval winter, that might be the closest thing to grace. The cough starts in the youngest, always does. A little rasp, a wheeze after running, well, waddling across the cottage floor. At first, you think it's nothing. Dust, cold air, an argument with the goat. But then the cough deepens, stretches longer, turns from sound into warning, and then it spreads. Everyone's coughing now. Uncle Gain hacks like a collapsing accordion. Your spouse has that hollow sound, like breath echoing through a church. Even the goat seems to sneeze. The air is thick with smoke, spores, and suspicion. Welcome to the family flu. There's no isolation in a cottage like this. No sick room, no clean space, no fresh air. Just straw mattresses, shared blankets, and a fire that can't decide if it wants to help or smother you. If one of you is sick, all of you are sick. You don't even need to share a bowl. Just share the air. You try your best with what little you have. Boiled nettle tea, fermented turnip, a poultice made from mustard seed in desperation. You crush dried herbs, brew cloudy mixtures in a cracked pot, and force your children to drink them. They gag. You sip it yourself and understand why. Mainstream historical fact: medieval cures for respiratory illness ranged from sensible, herbs like thyme and yarrow, to absurd, like drinking wine boiled with eels or tying roasted onions to your feet. Some worked, most didn't. But trying made you feel less helpless. You wipe sweat from your brow with a sleeve already stiff with use. You murmur prayers, not the fancy kind, the desperate kind. Short, blunt, whispered into the steam rising from a bowl of whatever you found under the stairs. Maybe soup, maybe science. The worst part? You can't stop. You're sick, but the fire still needs wood. The animals still need feeding. The floor still floods when the snow melts and the roof sobs. So, you wrap yourself in 3 layers of damp wool and drag your aching body out to the woodpile anyway. You slip twice. On the second fall, you just lie there for a moment and stare at the sky, wondering if this is how saints start their journey. Then the wind finds your neck, and you curse, and you get back up. Back inside, the baby is whimpering. You scoop them up. They're feverish. Their skin is warm, too warm. You rock them gently, humming some tune your mother sang when you were this small and just as helpless. The fire pops in sympathy. Quirky fact: some healers believed illness was caused by imbalance of humors in the body. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much phlegm? Cold baths? Too much blood? Leeches or knives? Sometimes both. You opt not to bleed anyone today. Instead, you crush a clove of garlic into the stew. It might help. It might just keep the rats at bay. The priest visits. He brings holy water and a long look. You ask for a blessing. He obliges. He also reminds you that sickness is often God's way of encouraging reflection. You nod, mostly to avoid sneezing in his direction. The neighbor's child didn't survive the last flu. You remember their funeral? If you can call standing in a frozen field while someone mumbles Latin a funeral. You remember the look on the mother's face. You remember the silence afterward. It still rings in your ears. You will not allow that silence in this house. So you stir the pot. You wrap the child tighter. You sit by the fire all night, dabbing foreheads with cloths dipped in snowmelt. Your spouse joins you. Neither of you speak. You don't need to. The message is clear. Not this time. The next day, someone's fever breaks. Not everyone, but one. And that's enough to keep going. Historians still debate how common true recovery was in these conditions. What's not debated: survival often depended less on medicine and more on sheer, stubborn effort. Tending the sick, keeping the fire alive, hoping. The cottage smells like onions, herbs, old soup, and damp wool. But there's life, there's movement. Even Uncle Gain is back to his favorite story about the time he wrestled a pig and lost. You smile. You hate that story, but you smile. The fire flickers. You add another log. You don't even mind the smoke this time. Someone sneezes. You roll your eyes and toss another handful of herbs into the pot. And you keep going, because illness comes for everyone in winter. But not everyone lets it win. The snow starts melting, but don't get excited. It's not spring. It's a false thaw, the cruelest trick of all. A sudden rise in temperature that turns frozen dirt to swamp, icicles to dripping daggers, and your perfectly solid cottage floor into something that squelches when you step on it. The air smells different, wet, metallic, and faintly like mold. The children are excited. They run outside barefoot, slipping in the mud, squealing. You yell after them, then realize you don't have the energy to chase them. You just pray the puddles don't give them more than a cold. The goats are annoyed. Their hooves sink with every step. One refuses to walk at all and stares at you like you invented the weather. The pig, on the other hand, is in paradise. Mud, glorious mud. He's practically bathing in it. You sigh. You'll be cleaning him for hours, or not. You may just give up and start calling him Sir Swine of the Marsh. Mainstream historical fact: medieval roads, and by extension, village paths, became almost impassable in thaw season. Without paving, dirt trails turned into ankle-deep mire, trade slowed, travel ceased, and diseases, carried in the runoff, began to rise again. You walk to the well. It's surrounded by slush, which your boots absorb like gossip. The water tastes wrong now, earthy, gritty, too cold and somehow too warm at once. You strain it through cloth, but the cloth has been used one too many times. Everything is compromised. Inside, the house smells like wet fur and old socks. The fire won't start properly. The wood is damp. The kindling sulks. You blow on the embers until you're dizzy, muttering curses and begging smoke to become flame. Eventually, it listens. Barely. Then the ceiling drips, not just one drop, a whole constellation of leaks. The thatch, saturated and shivering, can no longer resist gravity. You move your bedding. You move the stew. You move your sense of hope. Then the leak moves too. You run out of dry spots. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants patched their roofs annually or just learned to live with leaks. Judging by your current experience, it was probably the latter. You've already tried stuffing moss in the cracks. Now you're trying wishful thinking. The toddler falls in a puddle inside the house. You dry them off. Again. They think it's hilarious. You think about drinking lamp oil. Your spouse suggests moving the bed into the loft. It's warmer, yes, but it's also filled with sacks of grain, bundles of drying herbs, and one very determined chicken. You make space. The chicken protests. You apologize. The chicken forgives you. You sleep side by side. Not because of romance, because of rising damp. The animals are restless. The goat bleats all night. The pig tracks mud across your last clean tunic. The dog, wet and offended, curls under the table and growls at everyone indiscriminately. Even Uncle Gain has stopped telling stories, and now only mutters about the flood, as if you've built an ark without inviting him. And then the wind comes back. Not sharp like in January. No, this is the damp wind, the kind that creeps through your clothes, hugs your bones, and makes your teeth ache. It smells like decay and damp parchment. It carries with it the smell of things long buried, now waking up. You catch your reflection in the water pooling near the door. You barely recognize yourself. Mud-streaked, soot-smeared, with hair like a haystack that lost a fight. You look like someone who's just survived something. Because you have, and yet you're still in it. Quirky detail. Some medieval homes had trenches dug inside or around them to catch runoff and channel it outside. You try to copy the idea with a broken spoon and a lot of hope. It works for 5 minutes, then the pig falls into it. Outside, the snow starts again. You watch it from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to decide if you're angry or impressed. The ground was just starting to show. The mud was just getting manageable. And now, white again, fresh, cold, unapologetic. You go back inside, Hang your wet socks over the hearth. Again, stir the stew. Again, mop the floor with a rag that smells like last year's regrets. And yet, you notice something odd. You're used to it now. The leaking, the coughing, the mud, the cold. It's not good. It's not even survivable by modern standards. But to you, it's just another day. And that somehow feels like power. Historians talk about medieval resilience, how the people endured. But what they often miss is how quietly it happened. You didn't conquer the winter. You absorbed it, bent without breaking, changed without vanishing. You eat your soup. It tastes slightly better today. Or maybe your standards are lower. Either way, you're grateful. For food, for fire, for this moment of silence where no goat is screaming and no child is crying. You sip slowly. You listen to the snow. And in that moment, brief and fragile, you almost feel human again. You start counting days by candle stubs and firewood piles now. Not because you want to, but because that's what's left to measure. Time has lost its elegance. It's no longer marked by saints' days or feast days, but by how many pieces of dry wood remain before the kindling box turns into an empty echo. The fire is your lifeline. Without it, the house isn't a home. It's a tomb with goats. You've become an expert in coaxing flame from scraps, bits of rag, animal fat, splinters, even pages from the one book Uncle Gain can't read but insists on keeping. You burnt a chapter last week. He hasn't noticed yet. Each morning begins with the same ritual. Shiver, stir embers, squint into the ash, pray. Then, if you're lucky, a glow, a flicker, a start. You feed it with all the reverence of a monk tending holy relics, because in a way, it is holy. It's the only light you can make yourself. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval homes, keeping the fire going overnight was critical. Relighting from scratch was difficult without matches or lighters, often requiring flint and steel, or worse, a visit to a neighbor. Borrowing fire was not just a phrase, it was an actual errand. You've made that errand once already this season. You wrapped yourself in a cloak that smelled like smoke and mildew, trudged through calf-deep snow, and knocked on a door that groaned louder than its hinges. The neighbor handed you a lit ember and a crock of ashes like it was treasure. You thanked her like she was royalty. Today, the fire is behaving. You have one log left. One. You're saving it for nightfall. So now, it's all about stretching the heat. You boil water not just to cook, but to warm your hands. You sit as close as your eyebrows allow. You encourage everyone to huddle. Close enough to feel breath on your neck, but far enough to avoid accusations of hogging. And then, there's the matter of fuel. You've burned all the logs, then the chopped branches, then the half-rotten fence. You're eyeing the bench now, and the ladder to the loft. Both look increasingly flammable. Quirky detail. Some medieval families resorted to burning dried animal dung, known colloquially as fuel cakes. You tried it. It works. It also smells like every bad decision you've ever made. The animals resent you. The goat now sleeps on the last dry corner of the floor. The pig has chewed the handle off the stew pot. The chickens are laying somewhere, but you can't find where. You suspect they've formed a union. The children play games to stay warm. Stomping, clapping, shouting, anything to keep circulation going. You join in once. Then sit for 30 minutes wondering if your lungs still work. You watch your spouse wrap rags around their feet. No boots. Those were worn thin by New Year's. Now it's just layer after layer of cloth, tied with bits of string and hopeful knots. You copy the method. You look ridiculous. But your toes stop complaining. Uncle Gain tells a story about the winter of '89. No, not that one, the other '89, when the river froze and the baker's wife skated across it to deliver bread. You suspect it's a lie, but it makes the toddler giggle, so you don't interrupt. Historians still debate the psychological effects of long-term exposure to cold and dark in medieval populations. You could tell them it's like drowning, but slower, and somehow louder. The fire crackles, the wind moans, the children sniffle. It's a concert of slow unraveling. You dream of summer. Not the fields or the sunshine, but the smell of hot grass, baked earth, and sweat that doesn't come from fever. You dream of bees, of running water, of sleep without 5 layers of wool and a goat pressing against your spine. You wake to find your spouse watching the fire like it's a sunrise. Their eyes are red-rimmed, their hands blistered from chopping damp wood into smaller pieces to dry faster. You reach for their hand. It's warm. That's enough. The door rattles. You all jump. It's the wind. But for a second, your heart races. Visitors in winter mean news, or death, or both. You wait. Nothing. Just the creak of the latch settling again. You go outside, just to breathe. The snow is patchy now, ice crusted with slush like a cake left out in the rain. You walk to the edge of the path. Look out over the bare trees, the gray sky, the silent earth. And you feel it. Not spring. Not yet. But the idea of spring. The memory of warmth returning. The knowledge that things might change. You turn back toward the house. Smoke rises from the roof hole. Not much, but enough. Enough to say, we're still here. We're still burning. You step inside, kick the snow off your feet, and lay your last log on the fire. Just for tonight. You hear it first in the early hours, before dawn, when the sky is still a dull bruise and the world feels like it's holding its breath. A howl. Low, distant, deliberate. You freeze. Not from cold this time, but from something deeper, older. A fear that lives in the marrow, passed down from ancestors who once huddled in caves and counted the sounds in the dark. It comes again, closer. You lean toward the door. The latch creaks, the fire dims. You don't wake the others, not yet. You listen, squinting through the crack between door and frame. Just blackness and frost. And then, movement. Swift, quiet. The wolves are back. Not a fairy tale. Not some old superstition. Real ones. Fur, teeth, hunger. They come down from the forests in hard winters like this, drawn by smoke and the scent of livestock. Or children. You're not sure which is worse. Mainstream historical fact. Wolf attacks in medieval Europe were rare, but not mythical. Particularly during periods of extreme famine or in isolated villages, wolves, especially rabid ones, were known to approach settlements. Some chronicles even record entire packs attacking during deep freezes. You bolt the door. You press your weight against it, even though you know it's just wood and hope. You wake your spouse with a whisper. No panic, just urgency. The same kind you'd use if the fire went out, or if the pig had fallen into the stew again. Everyone gathers near the hearth. The dog growls low, not the bark of a challenge, more like a warning. He's old, arthritic, tired, but he remembers. The goat won't stop pacing. The chickens are still, almost eerily so. The pig is asleep, because of course he is. Useless swine. The children don't really understand. You don't explain. You just say, "Stay by the fire." And they do. Then comes the scratching. Not much. A soft test. Just enough to make the hairs rise on your arms. You glance at the small axe near the wood pile. You've never used it for anything except firewood. You pick it up anyway. Your spouse arms themselves with the iron poker. It's barely heavier than a spoon, but it feels good in their hand. Like intention. The wolves don't come bursting through. They're not stupid. They wait. They test. They circle. You can feel it. That sense of being watched from the tree line, even though the door is shut and the windows just parchment. You didn't bring the animals in tonight. It was too muddy, too crowded. The pen outside is barely holding. The goat's baby is out there, and that's when you hear it. A high-pitched bleat, desperate, sharp, then silence. You move before you think. Cloak, boots, axe. Door open just enough for your body, and you're outside, into the freezing black where the cold slaps you like a thief. The world is white and shadow. You run toward the pen. Not far, just 30 paces, but every step feels like an argument with the ground. You slip once. Catch yourself. The snow crunches loud. Too loud. You reach the fence. The gate is open. You didn't leave it open. Something's wrong. The goat is gone. The kid is gone. You see prints. Not hooves, paws, 4 toes, clawed, and blood. Just a smear. Faint, red against snow. Not enough to mean death, but enough to mean danger. You call out. Not yelling, a low call, a plea. It feels silly. You know the wolves don't return what they take, but still, you call. And then, motion to your left. You turn. A blur, gray, silent, watching. A single wolf, maybe 10 feet away, big, thin, but not weak, eyes reflecting what little moonlight exists, tail still, breath steaming. You raise the axe, not because you think you'll win, because it's what's expected. Because fear without action becomes collapse. The wolf doesn't move, just stares. Then it growls, low, deliberate, like it's disappointed in you. Then it vanishes. No charge, no attack, just gone. You stand in silence, heart in your throat, axe in your frozen fingers, and nothing but the wind to answer you. You don't know how long you stand there. Eventually, you stumble back to the house. Inside, the fire is still lit. The children are asleep again. Your spouse's face is pale, but calm. You shake your head. No words. Just sit. You lay the axe beside the door. Quirky detail. In some villages, families used to hang dried garlic or iron horseshoes near doors to ward off wolves and evil spirits. You don't believe in such things, but tomorrow, you might start. Historians still argue whether wolves were more feared for their teeth or their symbolism. To peasants, they represented more than predators. They were the physical embodiment of a world that didn't care whether you lived or died. And tonight, the world reminded you, but you are still here. You stoke the fire. Add what's left of the kindling. You hold your child a little tighter. And in the quiet that follows, with only breath and fire for sound, you realize something rare. You're not safe, but you're not gone either. By now, you don't flinch at every sound in the night. You've grown used to the rhythm of survival, the coughs, the cracking logs, the clucks, the snores. But there's another rhythm too, one you pretend not to notice. The rhythm of things disappearing. Not wolves this time, not weather, but smaller thefts, stranger ones. A wedge of cheese vanishes. You think the goat got it. Then your only comb goes missing. Then half a loaf of bread, gone from inside the sealed crock. You glance at the pig. He grunts in his sleep. You consider the toddler. Highly suspicious, but mostly illiterate and too small to reach the top shelf. And then, your best knife. The one you use to cut rope and scrape hides and occasionally threaten firewood. Gone. You begin to suspect something no peasant wants to admit. You're not alone in your own home, not spiritually. You're already convinced the cottage is haunted by your mother-in-law's disapproval. No, this is more practical. Someone is stealing from you. Mainstream historical fact, theft among the poor was common and quietly tolerated, up to a point. In communities where starvation loomed, borrowing without permission was often ignored, unless it was repeated. Then, punishments ranged from public shaming to losing an ear. You set a trap, not a real one. Just a bit of bread on a plate, in plain view, but precisely measured. You watch, you wait. The next morning, gone. Crumbs on the floor. A tiny thread, like from a worn tunic, stuck in a splinter on the bench. You don't say anything. Yet. Because there's a part of you that understands. Hunger makes people quiet, desperate, unseen. Still, your patience has limits. You begin patrolling the cottage like a minor noble guarding his potato fortune. You take mental inventory of every item. You sleep with the knife under your pillow. Not the stolen one, obviously. That one's in someone else's pillow now. Then, one night, you catch them. Not a stranger, not a ghost. Your cousin, the one who said they were staying with the Tanner's family, 2 fields over. Turns out they weren't welcome there anymore. And they've been slipping into your loft through a loose thatch panel for 3 weeks, living in the hay, eating your food, watching. The confrontation is quiet. You don't shout. You don't even raise the axe. You just say, "You could have knocked." They stare, ashamed, then shrug. You looked tired. You don't laugh, you don't cry. You sigh, and you let them stay. Because it's winter. Because the floor is already crowded. Because frankly, one more mouth isn't going to make or break the stew. Quirky fact, in some parts of Europe, squatters weren't just tolerated, they were folded into the household. As long as they contributed something, wood, food, mending, they could become a sort of unofficial servant or cousin in residence. It wasn't law, it was necessity. So now, there's an extra spoon at the table, an extra body by the fire, an extra reason to lock the chest. You rebuild the roof patch together. They help with chopping wood. They're not very good at it, but at least it's someone else's back that hurts for once. Uncle Gain complains, but then shares his boiled beet recipe without being asked. That's acceptance in his strange language. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were more communal or territorial, but for you, it's clear. Boundaries bend when survival demands it. This isn't generosity, it's insurance. One day, you might need a roof. The cousin teaches the toddler a game involving pebbles and hiding things under bowls. It's loud, it's chaotic, it's joyful. And for the first time in weeks, you smile without realizing it, until your sock goes missing. But you let it go. The fire crackles. The floor is a jungle of limbs and straw. The smell is still awful. The roof still leaks. But somehow the house feels fuller, not better, but less hollow. You wrap yourself in the blanket. You listen to the wind. You count the breaths around you. 1, 2, 3, more than yesterday. You fall asleep knowing someone is nearby. Not to hurt, not to steal, just to be here, like you, trying to survive. You hear the first bird song not with joy, but suspicion. It's too early, surely. The trees are still bare, the snow hasn't fully receded, and your boots are still wet from yesterday's melting slush. But there it is again, that cheery, naive chirp cutting through the morning fog like an insult. You step outside, carefully. The ground is no longer frozen solid, but it's not exactly firm either. It gives slightly under your weight, like bread dough that's been left too long. You look around, no buds yet, no blossoms, no promises, but something in the air has shifted. It's warmer, slightly, but unmistakably. Spring is thinking about arriving. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, spring wasn't a date. It was a feeling. The true thaw often came late March or even April, depending on region and altitude. And when it did, it didn't sweep in with flowers. It oozed in with mud, fog, and fatigue. You look up at the roof, the thatch held, sort of. There are still leaks, but fewer, less dramatic. The hole you plugged with goat wool and prayer seems stable. You make a mental note to repair it properly. Eventually, you glance at the pile of firewood. It's almost gone. Just enough for 2 nights, maybe 3. But you don't panic. Not this time. You've lasted this long. Your cousin is outside too, trying to sweep the path. The broom is more wish than tool. It pushes slush around, really. But it feels symbolic, like trying to make room for something new. You nod at them. They nod back. No words. None needed. Inside, the mood has shifted. Uncle Gain is humming again. The toddler is stacking stones into towers, then knocking them down with delight. Your spouse is combing their hair with an actual comb, miraculously recovered from the chicken coop, of all places. There's less coughing, less complaining, more silence, but not the heavy kind, the soft kind. Like everyone's tired, yes, but a good tired. A tired that says, "We almost made it." You boil water, not for soup, just to clean things. That alone feels revolutionary. You scrub the floor, lightly, with cloth that doesn't smell like rot. You find joy in the steam rising from the bucket. Quirky fact, many medieval peasants did spring cleaning, not for purity, but practicality. Mold, lice, and soot had to be cleared before the warmer months made them worse. It was survival through hygiene, and often a community event. You're not at community level yet, but you open the door wide and let the air in. It's still cold, but it smells different, like wet bark, like moss, like the end of something sharp. The children run outside. They fall. They get back up. They scream. They laugh. You don't stop them. You and your spouse begin patching the fence. The pig is delighted. It thinks this is a game. It nudges the posts, chews on the tools, then trots off to roll in the fresh puddle behind the house. You let it. It earned that puddle. Historians still debate whether peasants experienced relief at the end of winter or simply braced for the next struggle. After all, spring brought new challenges: planting, taxes, repairs. But right now, you allow yourself a breath. The neighbor visits. She brings eggs. Not many, 4. But they're fresh, warm even. You almost cry. She also brings news. Another family lost a roof. Another lost a child. You listen. You mourn. You don't compare. Pain isn't a contest, but you thank her. Deeply. The eggs go into a pot. Soft-boiled. Not over the fire. Over coals. Slowly. Luxuriously. When was the last time you had protein that wasn't just hope? You eat in silence. Eyes closed. The yolk is gold. The cousin speaks. "We should plant soon." You blink, then nod. Not because the ground is ready, but because you are. You make a list in your head: tools to mend, seeds to find, debts to avoid. It's overwhelming, but it doesn't crush you like it used to. Because spring isn't joy, it's work. But it's a kind of work that doesn't involve shivering in the dark, praying for fire. And that is a kind of miracle. You go outside again at dusk. The wind is softer now. The mud is less cruel. The trees look skeletal still, but not dead. Just waiting. Like you. You light one of your last candles, not because you have to, but because you want to. The light flickers gently. It doesn't feel desperate. You sit by the door. The pig leans against your knee. The chickens roost. Your cousin snores. Your spouse rests with a blanket over their knees, mending something you don't recognize. You look up. No stars tonight, but you know they're there. It's finally quiet. Not the eerie kind that used to creep in during snowstorms or wolf nights, but the heavy-lidded stillness of a house that's tired and satisfied. You sit at the table, fingers wrapped around a cup of weak tea, just boiled dandelion, really. But it feels like a feast. No one's fighting for the last crumb. No one's coughing so hard the fire goes out. No one's whispering about who didn't wake up. You've survived winter, but that doesn't mean you're the same. You've lost weight. The healthy kind. The kind that used to pad your ribs in autumn. Your belt needs tying tighter now. Your hands are rougher. Your nails look like splinters. Your shoulders are hunched slightly forward, as if still bracing for a wind that isn't coming. You step outside, where spring has officially arrived, not with a parade, but with mud-drenched certainty. Grass is peeking up where snow used to cling like sorrow. The sky's a different color now, not just gray. It has layers, possibility. You count the neighbors. Mainstream historical fact: mortality in medieval winters could be staggering. In hard-hit regions, 10 to 20% of a village's population might not survive a particularly brutal season. Children and the elderly were the most vulnerable. You get to 15 names before your throat catches. The smith is gone. So is the woman who used to barter turnips for yarn. The couple with the orange cat. They haven't been seen since Epiphany. No one says it aloud, but when someone's door stays shut this long, you start walking a little slower past it. Even your cousin is quieter now. They chop wood with that odd, deliberate rhythm you've come to expect. 2 quick hits. Pause, mutter, hit again. It's their own little song of penance. You haven't asked them to leave. They haven't asked to stay. You both understand that survival has a gravity. The house is still terrible. The floor squeaks. The corner where the pig sleeps is permanently damp. The roof creaks like an old man sitting down. But you don't hate it. You know every beam now, every leak, every loose stone in the hearth. And more importantly, you know who's missing. The toddler keeps asking for the neighbor's dog. You lie. He went to chase spring. You spend more time near the field's edge now. It's not planting time just yet, but you dig anyway. Little tests, a few inches down. The soil is looser. Wet, but not clumped. Almost cooperative. You dream of cabbages. Quirky detail. Some medieval peasants believed that talking to their fields in spring improved harvests. Whether prayer, song, or just complaint, early agriculture was as much ritual as science. You whisper to the dirt now, not because you believe, but because silence feels too risky. You repair the tools. You patch the sacks. You find a mouse nest in the seed store and chase them out with a ladle and a lot of yelling. It works. You think, unless they're smarter than you. The animals look alive again. The goat has started nipping at the walls. Always a good sign. The pig's appetite is back to concerning. The chickens, traitorous things, lay 3 eggs in one day. You forgive them everything. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood seasons cyclically or spiritually. You're not sure either. All you know is that this moment, this late thaw, this chance, is not a guarantee. It's a truce. You gather your family one evening and say nothing profound, just, "We'll start digging tomorrow." And they nod. And that's enough, because spring doesn't fix things. It just gives you time to try. The fire burns low, but not in fear. You don't panic when the wood runs out. You just fetch more. Your muscles remember the work now. Your hands are tools. Your spine is a ledger of every burden you carried, and every one you laid down. You sleep easier. You even dream, not of feasts or castles or miracles, but of waking up and finding the ground not frozen, of soup that doesn't boil away in guilt, of laughter, of things growing. You take a walk one morning and find the first wildflower, tiny, purple, delicate, laughable really, the kind of flower you'd ignore in any other season, but not now. Now you kneel beside it, not because it's rare, but because you are. You are still here. You are still here. And that is everything. The digging begins before your body agrees. Your muscles, still sore from hauling wood and carrying half-asleep children all winter, protest with every bend. Your knees pop, your back hums with complaint, and your palms crack as they grip the handle. But the soil is no longer frozen like iron. It crumbles, sticky and brown, clinging to your shovel in thick, gloppy defiance. And that's all the invitation you need. The sun is out, if only half committed. It plays hide and seek with clouds, teasing you with warmth, but not offering anything generous. Still, it's light. It's real light, and that alone is reason to work. You and your cousin take turns, with the one good spade, swapping every dozen rows. When it's your turn to rest, you watch the toddler wobble through the furrows, planting pebbles and whispering secrets to the dirt. You say nothing. After all, superstition is its own kind of insurance policy. The pig watches, unimpressed, occasionally stepping into your just-turned rows with great ceremony before flopping into the mud as though to say, "Plant me then. Let's see what grows." You mark out the field with twine scavenged from winter hay bales and crooked sticks collected last autumn. No symmetry, just hope. Turnips along the fence line, beans nearer the house, cabbage close enough to guard with a broom, potatoes, if you can find any to sprout, buried deeper still. You're not sure why this feels holy, but it does. Mainstream historical fact. For medieval peasants, spring planting wasn't just an agricultural necessity. It was a spiritual ritual. The first furrow turned was often blessed. Some kissed the earth before placing the first seed. Others murmured charms. When life hangs by a thread, even mud becomes sacred. You kiss nothing. You do, however, swear at the wind. Around noon, the neighbor arrives. She brings a pouch of rye seeds and an apology about that stolen onion. "The dog's a thief," she says, "but he knows good food when he smells it." You give her some of the cheese you scraped together last week, a hardened heel, but sharp and real. She tucks it away like gold. "No one's planting millet this year," she adds. "Too many birds." You nod. Information like that is currency. You keep working. By mid-afternoon, you've got half the field done. Your cousin's hands are blistered raw. You offer to take over, but they shake their head. teeth gritted in quiet defiance. It's become personal now. The kind of suffering that says, I exist. I'm still here. Quirky fact: some peasants believed that worms found in the first turned soil were signs from the ancestors, omens of fertility and favor. Your cousin finds one, holds it up reverently. You both stare at it like it's a saint, then gently place it back. At home, your spouse has boiled dandelion roots into a bitter tea and spread the last of your lard on stale bread. You eat it gratefully. Every crumb tastes earned. The toddler begins sorting beans by color and size. You pretend it's helpful. They smile like royalty. You smile back. As dusk falls, the wind changes. You pause mid-step, shovel in hand, and inhale. The scent is different. Not fire, not snow, but warm grass, wet bark, the promise of sap. A breeze like that would have meant nothing in October. Now it's cause for joy. Historians still argue whether peasants experienced progress the way we think of it. Seasonal arcs, a sense of direction. But for you, progress is simple. Today, your fingers are dirty from planting, not from scraping frost off the walls. You think about last spring, when half the seeds rotted, and the rain came too hard, too fast. You learned. This year, you leave the high ground for beans. You try not to repeat mistakes. The chickens, finally, lay more than one egg. You thank them out loud. They ignore you. The pig steals one anyway. You don't even chase it. You just sigh. You'll boil soup later with sorrel and ash bark and a pinch of onion leaf. It'll taste like regret, but at least it's warm. Your cousin surprises you with a song. A quiet, rhythmic hum. One their mother used to sing while she sewed. You join in on the second verse, even though you don't remember the words. You make them up. It becomes your own. Quirky planting ritual. Some families would whisper their wishes into a hollow bone and bury it among the seeds. You don't have a bone, but as you drop each seed, you think of something you want. Not wealth, not even safety. Just this, that the baby gets through the next winter without coughing. You finish just after the moon rises, low and fat and yellow like a boiled egg. Your legs shake, your fingernails are black, but the field is done. You sit by the fence. The pig collapses beside you, snoring like a bishop. Your cousin lies on their back, eyes on the stars. You whisper, "Do you think it'll grow?" They shrug. Has to. You both believe it, not because it's true, but because you can't afford to think otherwise. Inside, the fire is down to coals. You don't relight it? The air is mild enough now to sleep without shivering. Your spouse wraps the child in the patchwork blanket. The dog circles 3 times before settling at your feet. The house smells of sweat and soil and wet wool. But the silence feels earned. Tomorrow will bring aching muscles, more planting, and maybe another frost. But tonight, your body is sore in the good way, the clean way, the kind that says, you did something real. You dig in the dirt, because that's where hope lives now. Not in prayers, not in kings, not even in dreams. Hope is a bean, buried, forgotten, waiting. You wake before the rooster crows, before the pig stretches its stubby legs, even before your cousin's infamous snoring rattles the thatched rafters. Something in the air has shifted. Not a storm. No. This is something subtler, the kind of stillness that comes just before the world takes a new breath. The sky outside is heavy with mist. Not quite fog, not quite dew, something in between. It blurs the fence posts and softens the outlines of the fields you've come to know, like your own palms. Your breath forms a cloud as you step outside, barefoot, into the damp grass. Cold pricks your soles, but you don't flinch. You're not walking for comfort, you're walking for proof. And there it is, just beside the twine you tied to mark the bean rows. One single, defiant sprout, thin as a hair, green as envy, but alive, against all odds, against the frost, the mud, the thieving birds, and the clumsy toddler feet. You crouch. You don't touch it yet. You just look. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, sprouting seeds were symbols not only of agricultural success, but of divine favor. Many villages performed early spring blessings of the fields, often led by clergy or even monarchs in royal domain lands. You whisper something, words you don't even think about. Maybe a thank you, maybe a warning, maybe just don't die, please. You touch the leaf with the back of one finger, gentle as wind. It doesn't recoil. You smile. Back in the cottage, your spouse stirs a pot with a wooden spoon that's more knot than handle. You smell something bitter, maybe ground acorn mixed with the dregs of rye flour. Not porridge, but almost. The toddler babbles in the corner, clutching a carved wooden horse that's missing 2 legs. The cousin folds the patched blanket for the 5th time this week. They hum a song you don't recognize. You step back outside. The field is quiet, but not dead. You see it now. Tiny shifts in color, small cracks in the earth's crust, subtle rises in the soil where other sprouts might be hiding just beneath the surface. You squint. You imagine. You hope. The pig follows you, grunting softly. Not for food, just for companionship. It sniffs the dirt beside you, uninterested in the bean sprout, but fascinated by a nearby worm. It begins to dig. You gently nudge it away. Your cousin appears beside you, still chewing yesterday's crust of bread. They point at the sprout. That it? You nod. Looks edible. You sigh. Not yet. Ever? You shrug. If it survives, if we do, they pat your back. Well, no pressure then. Historians still argue whether peasants in the Middle Ages had emotional relationships with their crops. But when your life depends on whether a bean grows, how could you not? You spend the day walking the rows, not working, just looking. One patch of earth seems slightly sunken, maybe a mole, maybe bad drainage. You make a note to patch it with ash tomorrow. Inside, Uncle Gain insists on chopping wood. His hands shake, but he grumbles less than usual. You offer to help. He scowls. Still got breath in my lungs. Let me waste it how I want. Quirky fact. Some rural spring customs gave elderly villagers a chance to symbolically begin again by planting a seed, tying a ribbon to a young tree, or even blessing the livestock with chants. It wasn't about fertility. It was about dignity. You hand Gain a turnip seed, just one. He takes it without comment, walks to the edge of the plot, and pokes it into the ground with his thumb. Then he wipes his hand on his tunic and mutters, "That's my pension." By midday, your spouse finds wild garlic near the stream, its scent rich and sharp. They mix it with yesterday's barley mash, boil it down with a splash of sour ale, and serve it in uneven bowls. The toddler eats 2 portions. The pig steals a third. You feel almost festive. There's still hunger, still aches, still not enough of anything. But there's also sound again. Laughter that doesn't sound hollow. Conversation that doesn't trail off into fear. Your cousin starts drawing in the mud with a stick. They trace lines, then curves, then what appears to be a goat with 5 legs. You join in, doodling beside them, a sun, a house, a lopsided flower. The toddler adds a blob and proudly announces it's you. It's insulting. It's perfect. The fire is lit that night, not for heat, but for celebration. You sit around it, passing a cracked bottle of elderberry wine saved from last harvest. Only 2 swallows each, but enough to sting the tongue and warm the chest. You watch the flames, listening to the pop of old wood and the sighs of tired bodies finally resting. Tomorrow there will be more, always more, but not now. Now you watch the shadows flicker across the walls like they're dancing. Your spouse leans against your shoulder. The toddler falls asleep, curled against the pig. Your cousin hums that song again. You close your eyes, not because you're weary, but because you want to remember this moment exactly as it is. Historians still argue whether these peasants believed in progress, whether they imagined the future as better, or simply hoped for the same suffering in a slightly different shape. You don't know. But tonight, your house is full. Your belly isn't screaming. And the bean grew. You open your eyes and whisper, "We made it." Not to the end, to the beginning. And beginnings, you've learned, are the rarest miracles of all. The fire has gone from crackling to whispering, embers glowing soft orange, like sleepy eyes refusing to shut. There's no need to add more wood. The heat is enough, and the night is kind for once. You lie on your back, arms resting over a chest still rising from the work of the day. Your legs ache in a dull, heavy way that promises sleep will come fast. You welcome the pain. It's proof of movement, of action, of life. The air smells of warm dust, singed wool, and the faint tang of garlic still clinging to your fingertips. The pig, exhausted from its usual mischief, is curled near the door, belly rising and falling like a tired drum. Your cousin shifts slightly under a cloak that's more patch than fabric. The toddler has tucked themselves half on your spouse's chest, half off the mat. One sock missing, one dream underway. Everything is still. You listen, not for danger, not for the howl of wolves or wind or war. You listen because silence like this is rare. It's the sound of enough. You think of the bean again, that thin sliver of green breaking through a world not made for softness. No guarantees, no protection, but it pushed upward anyway, just like you did. Mainstream historians might dismiss days like this. Too ordinary, too repetitive, but you know better. This is what real resilience looks like. Not a speech, not a battle cry, just one more seed, planted with tired hands. You pull the blanket tighter, tucking straw beneath your shoulder to even the slope. The thatch above you shifts slightly in the breeze, moonlight peeking through tiny cracks like stars trying to get in. Tomorrow, you'll dig again. You'll mend what's torn. You'll find another stone in the soup, another joke worth repeating, another ache you can carry. But not tonight. Tonight, the work is done. The house is full enough. The hunger is quiet enough. The world is gentle enough. You close your eyes, not to escape, but to remember. And in the softness of the dark, you finally say it aloud. Not a prayer, not a wish, just a quiet truth that lives in your ribs. We didn't quit. We endured. We planted. And somehow, that is everything.